We hear a lot these days about the sandwich generation, adult children caring for aging parents. But what if you are aging and you don't have children to come and check on you and care for you? My guest on Hey Boomer today is Dr. Sara Zeff Geber, and she's an expert in aging, and in fact, she's written a book specifically for solo agers called Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers. In this episode, we ask some really important questions. Things like, who will be there to help you if you can't care for yourself? Who could speak on your behalf if you are unable to speak for yourself? And who is capable of making decisions for you that you may be unable to make for yourself at that point? These and many other important questions are discussed in this episode of Hey Boomer. My name is Wendy Green, and I will be your host. Hello, Hey Boomer listeners. It's another Monday, it's another Hey Boomer, and I'm so glad that all of you are here with us. I have some important questions for you. Do you have a will? Your power of attorney is defined. You've got your medical directive in order. Have you started withdrawing from Social Security or from your retirement savings account? Have you made plans for your long-term care, how you'd want to be cared for, where you'd want to be cared for? And have you had this discussion with your children or your spouse or your partner or your family? What if you don't have children or a spouse or a partner to talk this over with? Who's going to care for you if and when you need it? These are really difficult conversations to have in the best of times and when we have that family support that we feel we can depend on. But if you're a solo ager, these questions can become even trickier. Hi, Anne. So I'm glad that you all are joining us today for this important conversation. And the truth is, these questions that we're going to discuss today, they do apply in some ways differently for solo agers, but they also apply to all of us, and they're important questions for all of us to think about. Before we get started today, I did want to thank a couple of our sponsors for the Hey Boomer Forest Bathing event that's taking place on May the 4th. I wanted to thank DJ Benson and Associates. They are a safety and security consultancy specializing in threat assessment, management and mitigation, workplace violence prevention and intervention training, organizational and personal security assessments. And their motto is securing souls one client at a time. If you would like to get in touch with my friend Dave Benson, from DJ Benson and Associates, you can email him at dave@securingsouls.com. Our other sponsor for today is Shell Mendelson. And Shell says many people with ADHD struggle in their careers. But what if the problem wasn't you? What if you're just in the wrong job? She says people with ADHD are some of the brightest, most creative people in the world, but they have to play by their own rules. So using a proven process of self-reflection, Shell can help you unlock your full potential and find a meaningful and satisfying career. And you can find out more about this at passiontocareer.com. And I can tell you that Shell is very passionate about the work that she does. Speaking about forest bathing, Doris, David, Scott, Beth, Gail, Kathy, Rob, Bunny, and Lillian are all joining me on May 4th for forest bathing. And they're joining Angie Stiegel, who is our forest bathing guide. That means there are just 5 spots left. And I posted the link to register for forest bathing in the chat on both Facebook and LinkedIn. So you can go right now and sign up while there's still a few spaces left. It's going to be a wonderful way to ease out of our COVID isolation, make some new friends, and relax into nature. I hope you'll join me. It's really going to be a special, special event. And I would love to get you all to join the email list so that you can get our Monday morning announcements and you can get access to the blog posts that I write or the guest blog posts that we have. There are 2 ways to get on the email list. You can drop me a quick email to my account at wendy@heyboomer.biz, or you can go to the Facebook page and subscribe to the blog post. It's that simple. And then you'll be in the know with everything that Hey Boomer is doing. And with that, I'm going to bring on our guest today, Sara Zeff Geber. Hi, Sara.
Hi, Wendy.
So nice to have you. I really appreciate you joining me on the show today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Now I just want to know more about forest bathing.
I know. It's so cool. It's like this little meaningful 3-hour excursion into the woods, mindfulness. It's very cool. Yeah.
Wow, sounds very good.
Yeah. So let me take a moment and tell people about you, Sara. Dr. Sara Zeff Geber. She is a 2018 recipient of the Influencers in Aging designation by PBS Next Avenue. She's an author, a certified retirement coach, and a professional speaker on retirement and aging. Sara has developed a niche specialty, which we're going to talk about today, about solo agers, people who have no children or who are aging alone. Sara is the author of The Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers, a retirement and aging roadmap for single and childless adults. I read this book. I've marked it up. There's lots of worksheets in here. I am not a solo ager, but I found it incredibly useful. And with her speaking and writing, Sara has been raising awareness of solo agers for the past 10 years. She believes that solo agers have a unique need in later life that warrants greater foresight and a more robust approach to planning. And Sara is married, but she still considers herself a solo ager because she doesn't have children. She has a puppy, and she and her husband live in Santa Rosa, California. Is there anything I left out, Sara, that you'd like to add?
That's pretty complete. Thank you.
You are welcome. So before we jump right into all the things that we need to be thinking about, can you tell me kind of your career trajectory and how you got from where you started to your emphasis on solo aging?
Sure. Let's get a little bit circuitous. I was for 25 years a management consultant, organizational consulting, team building, that kind of thing. Wonderful career. I enjoyed it a lot. It morphed into more executive and management coaching than anything else. And there was a time about, 12 years ago when I found myself coaching a lot of baby boomers, which I'm obviously a baby boomer too. And so I was coaching people who were my contemporaries, and they started wanting to talk more about their retirement plans than their strategic plans. So I found myself doing a lot of coaching with regard to what they were going to do next in their own life rather than in their company. And I thought, I'm seeing a lot of this. Think there's something going on here. So the more I heard of that, the more I got interested in actually doing retirement coaching, because that's clearly what many of these people wanted. Now, at the time, it was, I must say, mostly men. Because again, of the baby boom generation, it's mostly men that hold those top leadership positions. That's changing, but for our generation, it hadn't moved the needle very far. So, and typically these men had not built any kind of a life for themselves outside of their work. So there was definitely a need for some coaching to get them from one place to the next, because they didn't know what they wanted to do in their retirement. And when we started talking about how are you going to add meaning and purpose to your life after you leave here, they were clueless. So I looked into retirement coaching a little further and discovered that there was an organization who actually trained retirement coaches. And even though I have my doctorate in organizational behavior, that didn't help me to understand anything about the retirement transition and kind of how people mature in their older years. So I went through the program and got a certificate in retirement coaching and kind of hung out my shingle. And I did retirement coaching for quite a long time. And then I had another epiphany about 3 years into that. I was looking around the scenario around me, the people that I knew, the people I worked with, the people I hung out with as friends. And so many of them were spending a tremendous amount of time taking care of their aging parents. We were all in our 60s, early 60s at the time. And so those of them, it doesn't include me, but those of them that had living parents, they were getting old. They were getting into their late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, getting to a point in their lives where they weren't quite managing as well as they had been 10 years ago on their own. So in some cases, my friends and colleagues were flying back and forth to the East Coast. They were, if parents were local, sometimes they were spending a tremendous amount of their weekends making sure that there was food in the house for the week, taking them to doctor's appointments, taking time off work to do these things, and in many cases, getting them moved into a safer environment. And so I watched a lot of this going on with people in my life. And I sat down to have a glass of wine with a friend of mine who also doesn't have children. And I said, Sandy, who's going to do that for us?
Big question.
Big question. Yeah. And when we looked at each other and went, I don't know. So I got very curious, and I started doing some research to uncover what the incidence of, I'd like to call it child-free rather than childless, at least among the people I knew, most of us were childless by choice. Right. We had made a decision somewhere back in the 70s that we were going to pursue a career. We were going to go it on our own. We were going to make our own path. If you remember, baby boomers were the first ones to have the pill. Right. They were the recipients of all of the noise that the ERA folks were making. I mean, I marched in some of those protests about unequal opportunities for women, and it changed. We made that change. So doors were opening not only to universities and colleges for women, but they were also opening to careers that women had never really been invited into before. So the world was our oyster, so to speak. We could control our reproductive processes however we wanted, and we could get out there and make a living for ourselves such that we didn't need to get married, and we could buck the tide and not have children and just pursue a career that was meaningful and important to us. So that's what I and many of my colleagues did. But here we are in our 60s and 70s, looking ahead and going, this is the choice we made. And now we have to do some planning, some really serious planning about how we're going to be taken care of or how we will take care of ourselves, which we may or may not be able to do for the entire length of our life,
Right.
without the help of adult children.
Right. So you must have done an incredible amount of research then to try to answer some of these tough questions. So, and I think even if we have children, it may be a situation where your children are not in a position to help and take care of. So let's start down the path about some of the things that you need to think about.
Sure. Well, one of the ways that I approached this kind of answer to so what do we need to think about, is to really look around me and observe what adult children were doing for their parents who were in their 80s and 90s. And so I came up with kind of several buckets of things. First of all, we certainly need to be very robust in our financial planning and our legal planning. So you mentioned early on something about, have you done your advance directive? Have you written your will? All of those kinds of things. This is where people who have been negligent and not do that, well, it kind of falls to their kids, and their kids grumble and grouse. But usually when push comes to shove, adult children come in and do what's necessary when their parents run into a crisis. In our case, those of us who don't have kids, there is no safety net. So we really have to think long and hard about who we want to be our proxy, who we want making decisions for us if we are unable at some point. Things happen. People have strokes, people have heart attacks, people get into accidents, people fall, people break hips and all kinds of things and end up in rehabilitation units of nursing homes that they never, ever planned to be in. So if the more we can get around our resistance to looking at that potential future and make some plans for it and understand what our options are going to be at that time, find people that will be proxies for us. That's the way that we need to plan as we get older.
Yeah. And Sara, you talk about that some in the book. These conversations are difficult at best, right? Mm-hmm. So finding a proxy, somebody who is not a blood relative, and just to build on this question, my other question is, so maybe they're our same age, they could be in trouble before us, right? So maybe you need more than one. And how do you build that trust and build that conversation?
Well, first of all, let me address a couple things that you said. It just because we don't have adult children doesn't mean that we don't have blood relatives that might fill that gap.
Right. Okay.
So,
good point.
Those of us that are close emotionally, hopefully, and or physically, to our brothers and sisters who do have children, those nieces and nephews, to me, are kind of the first line of defense. That's who you would go to first. But they need to know you. You need to have been close to them as they were growing up, ideally, been in their life somehow, or at this point in your life can find a way to help them. Because in a way, enlisting the aid of nieces and nephews, we need to kind of pay it forward. So I know, I'll give you a couple examples out of my life. I have helped two of my nieces get through college. Their parents, my brother and his wife, did not do as well financially. And so I stepped in and helped at many junctures. Even though I didn't live very close, I tried to visit as often as I could. So my nieces will be involved. But the person I'm closest to and who I know will be the closest physically, geographically to me, is actually a cousin who's 15 years younger than me.
Okay.
So those kinds of possibilities work. Now, there are even technical solo agers that I don't even think of as solo agers. One woman I know is the fifth of five sisters, and the sisters are all fairly close in age, within a couple years of each other. And when my friend got out of college, she went on to get further education. She became a scientist. She traveled all over the world, but she never got married and had kids. However, 20 years ago, when she kind of came home to California to stop all the traveling and whatnot, she resumed her relationship with all of her, gosh, she must have 10 or 12 nieces and nephews from those other sisters. And she's very close to them. And so my guidance to her was just, Linda, talk to them. Talk to them. And that's the key that most of us have to use, is we need to not only kind of pay it forward with those nieces and nephews and mentor where we can, help them understand from a different perspective than their parents, maybe what they're going through. Because people go through things at every stage of life. And if you have nieces and nephews in their 30s and 40s, they're still needing help. They're probably raising kids now or trying to build a career. So be in their life.
Yeah. And I can tell you, as mom, they'd rather talk to their aunt than
right.
to their mom.
That's
they
right.
don't want my advice.
Yeah, that's right. So,
yeah. But these are difficult conversations, Sara. Do you have like guidance or tools that you use to be able to start these conversations?
You won't find a lot of that specific thing in my book. I do mention it, but there are some wonderful resources out there. Ellen Goodman, a journalist that has also written a lot of books, has headed up something that, I think started about 10 years ago, called the Conversation Project.
I've heard of that. Yes.
Yeah. So check that out. That's great guidance. There's an organization called Compassion and Choices. They have some good guidance. Okay. Remember, all of these things are leading up to the topic that nobody wants to discuss, which is death. And one of my crusades is to get people to talk more about death. It's not like anybody's going to avoid it. We're all going to get there one of these days. And so, how much better a life we could lead, how much more peaceful a life we could lead if we just understand that death is part of life and help people to talk about it. There's something that's been going around the world actually for about the past 12 or 15 years called Death Cafe, where people get together and just talk about death, really? Any aspect of death. But the more you can talk about it, the more you can incorporate it into your thinking about what this life is all about. And what is what's some people are terming a good death? What is that? So talk to your proxies, your nieces, your nephews, your younger friends. By the way, I don't mean to say that you always have to choose a blood relative. Some people really have no blood relatives to choose from. Mm-hmm. And then my next suggestion is look to the organizations you belong to. And if you don't belong to any organizations, start thinking about joining some. Mm. Everything from book clubs to hiking clubs, running groups,
service
organizations, the people you volunteer with, the places of worship. Every place of worship I've ever seen, whether it's a synagogue, a mosque, a church, they all have groups that cater to people's special interests. They have new mothers groups, and they have singles groups, and they have bereavement groups that their job is to help people through the stages of life. So if you belong to a religious organization, that's a great way to find people that share your interests, that you might strike up new friendships with, that are a little bit younger than you. A colleague of mine recently approached a woman that she'd been somehow putting it off for years and years and years, talking to a friend that was 15 years younger than she. But they had been very close at one point. Then they worked together and they kind of lost touch, but she made a point of getting back together and finally got up the courage to say, can I put you on my advance directive? I
Oh,
just really have nobody else in this area. And she was absolutely honored.
yeah.
And most
Yeah.
people will be. They'll be honored that you would trust them like that. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. It can be frightening, but you can be surprised at the response.
yeah.
So I want to switch a little bit from talking about the death, although that is important, and we do need to be able to have those conversations, to talking about the living. So one of the things that you spend a lot of time with in this book is where to live.
Yeah.
So aging at home or retirement communities, active adult communities, villages, all these different options, which we all have to consider. But what makes that a different consideration if you're a solo ager?
It's a matter of degree. Um, I've had people say to me things like, "Well, I'm going into my 70s now. I live 10 miles out in the woods. I've always liked it that way. I like my animals more than people. Why should I move into town? Why should I develop these friendships you're talking about? I don't even really like people." And I so and they'll say, "So what's a solution for me?" And I have to look and I'm going to say, it's your choice. You can live however you want to live
Yeah.
and know that you are actually by default making choices about what might happen in an emergency. So, it is my belief that we are social creatures, and I encourage living in community, whatever that
Mhm.
means to you. And we can define community in so many different ways, but it doesn't necessarily mean moving into a senior living facility. Um, Continuing care senior living facilities are very expensive. They're kind of the creme de la creme. About 6% of the population can afford those elite living situations. But there's everything and anything um, beyond that. I'm a big fan of home sharing. I'm a big fan of co-housing. I'm a big fan of tiny home communities. I'm a really big fan. Now, you have to understand, I live in California where the weather is conducive to this, but all over the Southwest, we have thousands of mobile home parks.
Hmm.
And I'm a huge fan of mobile home parks for people that are downsizing and want to live in a one level unit where they have only to walk out their door to find somebody to talk to. Now, that's true, and that can be true in a condominium or an apartment building. Sometimes we have these sort of, I call them default retirement communities of people that have just been living in the same complex for 30, 40 years, and they've gotten to know each other and they support one another. And that's good. But what I don't like to see, what I think is very dangerous, is this whole concept of aging in place.
Mhm.
If aging in place means to you that you're going to stay in your 2 or 3 story suburban home out on a cul-de-sac somewhere where there's no public transportation, you don't know your neighbors because they're at different stages of their life or whatever, and there you are. You've been in that house for 30, 40 years. Maybe if you have raised kids, maybe you've even raised kids in that house, and your kids maybe are saying, "Oh, don't sell the family home, Mom. We love coming home for Thanksgiving." Well, it's probably time to get rid of that family home. Are
Mm.
you going to be able to do those stairs safely when you're in your late 70s, 80s, 90s? And yes, I included, know people who have done that. However, most of the people that I see doing that successfully do have kids that come over and kind of fill in the blanks. They live
Mhm.
close by, so they help with transportation, they help with groceries, they help with the chores around the house, because one of the biggest reasons that people do move into some kind of senior living environment is that they just don't have the energy and the strength to take care of that home anymore.
Yeah, and the scary thing is, you hear these stories about someone that has fallen in their home and they don't live with anybody and they're
Right.
lying there for days before somebody
That's right.
happens to come in and check on them.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big,
The repercussions of doing that are the downside of staying like that is they're pretty dire, I think. But again, it's a matter of figuring out what kind of community you would be happy in. And a community can be two. However, not your spouse. I like to also encourage people who are married to get out beyond your spouse and find relationships, find friendships, join a book club, join a walking group, join a golf group, do something that gets you communicating and hanging out with people other than your spouse. That's why I include married people in my definition of solo ager, which, by the way, has expanded tremendously. I really used to think of solo agers as just people who didn't have kids, period. But I had so many people come up to me and say, well, I'm a solo ager. I have kids, but they live 6,000 miles away, or I have kids, but we're estranged, or they kind of failed to launch, or in any kind of
right,
situation.
right. And you never know what can happen, even if you're married,
Exactly.
you could still end up being a solo ager.
And
Yeah.
the thing about it is, especially if you don't have kids, unless you get hit by the same bus on the same day, you and your spouse are both need to plan to be solo agers, because one of you is going to be a true solo ager someday.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So you list a bunch of categories. I think there's 6 that you say are super important to be thinking about as you're aging and, in our 70s, 80s. But what would you say are like the top 2 or 3 that we all need to focus on and really start spending time thinking about?
yeah, I liken it to that old three-legged stool. It seems like everybody has a three-legged stool for something. And my three-legged stool is legal, financial, and social.
Okay.
We all need to have our legal act together. You need to get that will done, get the advance directives, choose your proxies, get those signed, talk to the people that you're naming as proxies, do all of that, set up a trust if your attorney thinks you need to. The second is financial. Make sure that you can maintain the lifestyle that you are enjoying now until you're 100 or however long you think you'll live. I know a lot of financial planners are running their spreadsheets for people out to 103, because it's not unusual for people to live to 100 anymore. So, take a look at how you're living right now and get the help of a financial planner, even if you just pay for an hour or 2 of his or her time, and say, am I going to be able to sustain this with the income I have, whatever that income is from, however long you're going to work? Factor some of those things in, because even if you're still happily working now, the day may come, and like many people, you're saying, I'm just going to work till I drop. Well, drop can be defined in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, true.
Everybody thinks that they're going to just have a fatal heart attack one day at their desk or out on the golf course. But that's not how most people spend their 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
So,
so that's a scary question too, though, because if you don't have a big source of income and you're in your 70s, then then you have some other really important decisions, like downsizing and
downsizing. Living here in the outskirts of the Bay Area of California, I often say to people, not tongue in cheek, there is life outside of California. And life is a lot less expensive outside of California. Now, lots of younger people are very much discovering that. We've had a huge exodus of people to Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas and places that our generation would just never have considered. But young people are going. They're going for the jobs. They're going for to be able to afford their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
So think about where you're living. I even encourage some people, especially people who are looking at really low income levels and saying, I just can't afford to get old. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
And of course, if you've seen Nomadland, you know what can happen. And unless you want to join the brigade of people who live out of their RVs and vans and whatnot, think about living outside the confines of the U.S. There are lovely places to retire. There's a great organization called International Living, which their whole business, they have a magazine, they have a big online presence. They have people that live in all kinds of countries all over the world that write about and talk about what it's like to retire there and what it costs to retire there. So if that's something that really pushes a button for you, check out International Living.
Yeah, and they talk about the healthcare options outside of the country.
But they cover it all. They choose the 10 best countries to retire to, or 10 best locations to retire to every year. I always write an article for I write a regular column for Forbes.com, and I always cover that every year. What are the top 10 this year? And you'd be surprised. And they cover everything from what's the healthcare like, how welcoming is it for expats, can you get a work visa if you want to work down there? What is the healthcare situation like? You name it, they have researched it.
So that could be an interesting option.
It's an option.
Yeah.
And then finally the social, what a lot of people let slide as they get older is they lose their friendships, they lose their relationships with people. And I think after we're out of the workplace, we have to work a little harder, a little differently to make sure that we do continue to be social, that we have people in our lives, whether they come from our volunteer work or some civic organization, or maybe from our place of worship, our neighborhood. It can be anywhere, but be careful of not cocooning too far. We've all had a taste of cocooning this last year in the pandemic. And fortunately, most boomers now have had vaccine. So at least that's pretty true in California and other states where friends of ours live, and are getting out and resuming those relationships, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I think it's really important too. And I think we have had that cocooning thing, but I think there are limitations. Like if you're not really mobile, if don't drive after dark. I mean, just reaching out and making new friends. So those are all great reasons for getting out of that suburban home and into some kind of community where you'll be near people, some of whom do drive. I know a lot of the mobile home parks have they have community rooms, and they use those community rooms for potlucks, and they usually have a swimming pool and people gather around there. It's like a club. And so anytime you have a club-like atmosphere, you're gonna form relationships if you get out there and at least have the intent of doing so. So here's where it gets tricky though, right? So we have this mindset where we've been working, we've been living in this nice house, we have this nice yard and our flowers and all this little stuff. And, and then to think about giving all that up, and it's my bias, I know that, but to think about moving into a mobile home park, I'm like, oh, what a step down. That would feel bad, but maybe somehow coach me on how would I shift that mindset?
You know what? The biggest thing I tell people, and it might not be a mobile home park. It might be a really lovely condominium complex somewhere closer to a downtown center. I have a number of colleagues who have kind of decamped out of the suburbs into a more urban environment where there's transportation, and again, where there are people right next door. The Go visit some of these places. Just go walk around. If it's somewhere that you have to get special permission to enter, especially now with COVID, get that permission. I tell people to do that with regard to senior living communities too. Go look at what an active adult community looks like. Active adult communities are the old Del Webb of the 50s and 60s, kind of revamped for a more modern day. Some of the latest ones that I get a kick out of were built in Florida on Jimmy Buffett's model. They're called, it's for parrot heads. It's for people that are Jimmy Buffett fans. They're called Latitude Margaritaville.
Oh,
those are active adult communities. You have to be 55 to move in there, and boy, people can't move into them fast enough.
That's great.
So there are those kind of communities all over the country, predominantly in the Southwest. But you'll find those kinds of communities that look more like a condominium structure than a cluster of, a couple thousand homes around a lake or something. But they're just urban home. They'll have to pull you out of their feet first. Oh, I've had that enough times. I could scream.
And Doris mentions tiny homes. You also mentioned cohousing. What is that?
Cohousing is a grassroots effort by usually one person or a small group of people who want to develop what usually looks like a condominium setup, where they and their friends and people that also are interested and that they invite in live together. It's not a commune. Everybody has their own unit, like their own condominium unit, but they deliberately, it's for people who want to build community. So they always eat at least 2 or 3 meals together every week. They have meetings about how what they need to do in the community. They take care of the community. They usually have elaborate gardens, and it's driven by the residents, the people who live there, the homeowners, and it's a homeownership model. It's generally not a rental model, although I know some co-housing communities have a couple of units that are rented out. But it's comes under the umbrella of intentional community. The old intentional communities used to be mostly religious or guided by some lifestyle choice. Now it's just simply, many of them are just simply co-housing. There are several architects in the country that do nothing but build co-housing developments. Easy to find more information online. Go to cohousing.org or cohousing.com. You'll find just everything you ever wanted to know. You'll see a map of where they all are in the country. There's several hundred of them, and what stage of development they're in. To me, it's just a wonderful concept. Now, by the way, they are multi-generational, most of them. There are some that are being built to be elder co-housing, but the vast majority of co-housing communities are multi-generational. People raise kids there.
Nice. So we are getting close to time, Sara, and there's so much to still talk about. So could you give us like 2 or 3 what you would say are the most important things people should do today, right now, to start planning for aging and solo aging?
Well, I would think about that 3-legged stool. How far along are you in your planning? Have you done your legal planning, your estate planning? Set up advanced directives, set up powers of attorney, written a will. If you're thinking, oh, I don't want to do that, those attorneys are so expensive, you can find legal advice in a less expensive way. One way of doing that is going through your your county office on aging. They usually have attorneys on, not on staff, but attorneys that they know work at a lesser rate for people that really can't afford their services any other way. So there's that, and there's seeing a financial planner, getting that person to run that spreadsheet for you to see how you're going to do financially for the rest of your life, and then assessing your social situation. Do I have do I have a handful at least of friends, people I can call? Do you have 2 or 3 people you could call at 2 a.m. in the morning if you somehow needed them?
Yeah. Well, hopefully my sister will answer the phone if I call her.
I hope so.
I know. I wanted to share how people can get in touch with you. Sara has a website, sarazeffgeber.com. And you also have other things that you are involved with. I've seen you post on some of them. So if people are interested in some of those, will they find the links on your website?
Yes, you certainly find links for how to buy the book. You can also find me and a lot of contact information and a lot of videos of me speaking. I do a lot of speaking engagements. So if you have an organization that you think could you find this information useful, you call on me to do that. Look me up on LinkedIn. That's a really good source of information on me and on what I do. So I think those are the two, the website and LinkedIn are the 2 best places.
Okay. I highly recommend your book. It's one thing to get it. It's another thing to really do some of the things that Sara recommends. And like you said, visit those places. That's my hardest one. I've got to do that. All right. So I wanted to also remind people that Hey Boomer is supported by you and occasionally by sponsors, but mostly by you and your participation in events, and also by your support by buying me a cup of coffee. So this is a website where you can go. You can contribute anywhere from $10 to $75, and it just helps keep Hey Boomer going. So please go in and buymeacoffee.com at heyboomer0413. And now I would like to tell you all about our guests for next week. And I say guests because we're actually having 2. It's Eva Hausman and Kim Athen, and they are a mother-daughter duo who started something called the Mother's Day Movement. They read a book called Half the Sky by Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Wudun. You're shaking your head. You've read it.
I haven't read it. I've heard about it, though. I've heard good things about it.
It is a powerful book about the oppression and exploitation of women around the world. Not comfortable to read at all, but opened your eyes. And as they read it, they thought, we spend so much money, billions every year, on cards and flowers and chocolates for our mothers, that what if we took some of that money to help these women, not just around the world, but the charity they're working with this year is in our country, in Navajo Nation, who doesn't have any clean running water. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. They are very passionate about what they're doing and how they're doing it. So join us for that. And I always like to end with a quote from C.S. Lewis, where he says, "You are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream." Thank you, Sara, for joining us today. This has really been informative and important conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Wendy.
My pleasure. And thank you all for joining us. You are the reason that Hey Boomer is here. I love you. I hope to see you all next week. Bye.